Hello everyone, my name is Katie Carson and I am the Duchess of Suds here at Royalty Soaps, and welcome to another Royal Creative Academy video. I have made videos in the past of my embed process, but today I decided to go a little more in depth and talk even more about the molds that I use, the materials that I use, the way that I color, how long I wait to unmold, all that good stuff. Of course, I am tailoring this video to soap makers, people who would like to put small, dainty pieces of soap onto their larger creations, but you can use most of the things I'm talking about today, including the silicone molds, for candle making as well. You can also use the molds for resin work, polymer clay, there's tons of different applications. So without further ado, let's make some embeds. I have here a lot of different silicone molds displayed because those are the ones I am most comfortable with. Those are the ones I use the most. They release soap from their cavities the easiest. However, you can also use chocolate molds. I don't like those as much. They're a lot more rigid, they're harder to clean, but in a pinch, they are normally less expensive. And very often you can get the same sort of detail that you can get out of a mold like this. Now, all the molds I have on my table right now are from different suppliers. I'm gonna leave my favorite silicone mold suppliers down below, and that does include AliExpress and Amazon. I'm gonna talk first about this one. So this is what we call the signature Royalty Soaps Gumball mold. You can get it at Wholesale Supplies Plus, Brambleberry, even Nurture Soap has them. And we just call it the signature Gumball because this is the mold that I have been using for years and years and years and years to put the little soap gumball on the top of my soaps. It does not mean that I am the only one that's allowed to use them. These are sugar cube molds. These are from Vanulay. The detail is impeccable. The price is very fair for what you're getting. I really like them. These are from a company that I cannot remember the name of. These are peach slices. I believe this company is relatively small and also relatively new. Simeon was actually the one to source these, and once again, I'll leave all the links down below, but these are also very, very detailed, and I really hope they extend their product line because they're very good molds. Pretty sure these little strawberries are an example of an Amazon mold. Extremely detailed, as you can see. They're gonna do perfect for little strawberries on top. And then this is an example of another Amazon or AliExpress. They have the same mold on both websites. Again, very, very detailed. Also, very thin. Now, all the molds I just showed you are for embeds on the top of the soap, but what if you want an embed on the inside? A soap cane, as it were. Well, then you're gonna need some sort of tube mold. This one is obviously from Brambleberry. And you pour the soap inside and then pull it apart like so. Now, I have seen a lot of people complain about their soap leaking out of this type of mold, but me, myself personally, I probably have 10 of them in my studio. Never had one leak, never had one look bad. They always do a stellar job, but you do have to make sure that you have clamped these silicone bits together all the way down. You can't have any bubbles. Wholesale Supplies Plus has a giant range of these. So besides using silicone and plastic molds and using column molds, you can also use PVC pipe, by the way. Lots of people I know use PVC pipe to get big round circles to put on the inside of their soap. Besides using those materials for making soap embeds, you can also use soap dough, and that's gonna act kind of like a clay. So it's gonna be pliable, it's gonna be something that you mold yourself. You can also use like a fondant mat with it, but the majority of people that I know that use soap dough typically mold it by hand. The most stellar recipe and provider of soap dough that I personally know is Sorcery Soap Dough. They recently just put out a collaboration with Nurture for a bunch of beautiful colors with the Sorcery Soap Dough book, which has recipes for creating the colored soap dough. In my opinion, soap dough is the most time consuming. It also has the most artisanal effect on your product. So it really just depends on where you are at, essentially, in your soaping journey. If you're making hundreds of bars, you're not gonna have time to hand mold a bunch of embeds. But if you are a hobbyist or you're making very small batches, it's the perfect way to add that little extra touch, go the extra mile, and make an amazing, amazing embed. So I'm gonna move some of these off to the side, and we're gonna start mixing up some melt and pour. Now, melt and pour soap, or glycerin soap, as some people prefer to call it, is soap that has already been made. The chemical process of saponification has already happened, and because of its chemical makeup, you can actually chop it into bits like I've done here, melt it in your microwave, and then mold it with a mold. This is the type of soap that you're going to find in craft stores and is the most beginner friendly. And there's lots of different types of melt and pour to choose from. What I have here is the stuff that I like to use, which is low sweat melt and pour. That means when your climate gets very humid, it is going to have less of a chance of developing those little slimy droplets on top. It also has the least amount of artificial additives. As an example, propylene glycol is not in the low sweat bars. If you are wanting to make embeds that are anything other than pastel, a black, a deep red, a really vibrant green, you're gonna wanna use clear. However, if you're trying to make a white soap or a pastel, then you're gonna use a white melt and pour base. At Royalty Soaps, we typically use the clear because that is what is gonna carry your color the best. Like I said before, this raspberry mold is new, so I'm gonna be doing an experiment today to see how much it can hold. So I'm gonna put my little container here on my scale, and we're gonna tear it out, and then we're gonna add the clear melt and pour. So I'm just gonna add, I don't know, I'd say about 4 ounces or so maybe. Let's do right at 5 ounces. And then I'm gonna heat this up in the microwave for about 30 seconds. If you're making teeny tiny embeds and you're not working with this much soap, you're gonna wanna heat it up for maybe 10 seconds at a time because you do not want your soap to start to bubble up. If it starts to bubble and steam, you're gonna have a way higher chance that your soap is going to sweat, and you do not want your embed sweating on the top of your cold processed soap. It doesn't look very professional. It looks kind of sticky and gooey. It's just not good. Another way to avoid that is to pour and heat only once. I see this all the time, that people continue to reheat and recycle the melt and pour. Maybe it sets up a little bit. Oops, now I'm gonna pop it back in the microwave to make it liquid again. The more you do that, again, the more likely you're gonna have dewdrops of glycerin sweat develop on the top of your melt and pour. Don't do that. Don't reheat it. Heat it once and you're done. As you can see, the glycerin soap has been melted down and there are no little chunks floating around. That's another big deal. You don't want them to be floating. It is time to color the soap. Now, for coloring glycerin soap in general, not just soap embeds, I typically recommend using a color that has already been dispersed in glycerin. I really like TKB Trading's line of liquid colorants. I think they are absolutely fabulous. They're very easy to work with, very easy to disperse in glycerin soap. The other alternative that I also enjoy are micas, but I do not like any sort of powdered colorants because they get clumpy, they tend to not disperse very well. I don't like adding anything that's water-based into my melt and pour, so this is really what I recommend. Nature's Garden also has a line of some liquid colorants. And then for micas, you guys know that I like Nurture Soap and Mad Micas. Once again, links to everything will be down below. So for the raspberry color, I'm gonna start with a little bit of Relay Race Red. I know that it is very, very good at getting you a nice ruby red toned, but also not really making it opaque. This is a great colorant if you're trying to do maybe like a stained glass. So to add a little bit of opacity to it, I'm gonna put in some tomato red concentrate. This is a little bit thicker, and the color itself tends to make your soap just harder to see through, a little less transparent. I put a drop of each, the drop of the first one a little bit more than the drop in the second one, but together they've really made a beautiful red. Also, if you want your soap to be hyper realistic, you probably don't want to use a mica. You want to use a matte color because it's going to add a little shimmer to your soap, which is great for me and my purposes today. But if I was doing, say, a realistic looking blackberry, I would use a black oxide that had been dispersed in glycerin already, and I wouldn't add anything shiny. So let me just move my mold over here and we'll begin to pour. By the way, the cup that I'm using was a freebie that I got in a package one time. I'm not really even sure where it's from, but we use it all the time for doing embeds. I do not scent my embeds. Most of the time they are just way too small for that to even matter. Also, totally okay if you drip a little bit. It's hard to get these 100% perfect. If I was using cold process soap for my embed making and the embed is large, like something that is maybe a soap cane in the middle of a soap, I might fragrance that. But for these little bitty guys that are less than even half an ounce, it doesn't really matter. Don't waste your fragrance. Now you see, I just filled up my final embed cavity and I have some soap left over. This, I think, once again, is where a lot of people make the mistake of just letting it sit because, say, their mold is all filled up, maybe they only have one, so they let this sit off to the side, it hardens up, they end up popping these out of the mold, and then they reheat this. That right there is what is gonna give you those sweaty, smeary embeds inside of your packaging. So don't do that. I do happen to have another mold here, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue to fill until my 5 ounces is completely divvied up. Another tip that I have is once you have poured all of your embeds, don't move the embeds. If you do, you might get a little wrinkly top. You might have it start spilling out of the edges. It just doesn't look good. So even though I know that this is slightly off center now to the camera, I'm gonna go ahead and use this blank area right here to show you guys the soapy math I'm about to do. This mold has 23 cavities, but 5 ounces was able to fill 35 cavities. So we're gonna take our 5 ounces, we're gonna divide it by 35, and 0.1428571 is approximately how many ounces each raspberry is. If we want 23 raspberries, we will then multiply 0.1428571 by 23, and that equals 3.28571, or just 3.28 ounces. Most people's scales just round up by the quarter, so for the sake of ease, we are simply going to say that you need 3.25 ounces of melt and pour to fill one of these molds. So once I pop these out, I will flip it over, I will write 3.25 ounces on the back, and you're one and done. You'll never have to do the soapy math again. If you don't have an extra mold like I do and you're still trying to determine just how much this mold holds, you can also place your mold on the scale while you're pouring, depending on how big it is, or the pitcher that you're pouring out of, make sure you have 2 so that you can tear out the empty one and calculate it based on how much soap is left in your container. I'm gonna let these sit now just right here, and then we'll come back in approximately 30 minutes to pop them out. Another quick tip: do not ever put your melt and pour in the freezer or in the refrigerator. This is another thing that is gonna cause them to sweat. Just be patient, leave them out on the counter. Now let's say you have a teeny tiny mold like this that's gonna be difficult to pour out of a pitcher of this size. You can then take a pipette, these are available at most soap suppliers, squeeze the air out of the bulb at the top, place it in, and then pull back with your fingers to suck up the most soap that you can, and then squeeze until you're at the very top, and squeeze again. This mold probably isn't small enough to actually warrant using this technique, but it's the smallest cavity mold that I'm working with tonight. This is a great way to keep your area clean, keep your molds clean, and be really accurate. I'm sure there are some people who would rather just clean up the soaps after they have poured them, maybe let them connect at the top with a little bit of excess melt and pour, and that's totally fine too. This is just a personal preference. And let's say that as you are adding to your silicone mold, maybe you get some bubbles on the top. I'll go ahead and make some on this one. Oops, you've got bubbles on top just like that. Keep a spritzer handy of 91% rubbing alcohol, spray it down, and they'll all pop and have nice and smooth tops. Okay, you see all those bubbles? I filled this one up a little bit more. This is what happens when they get spritzed. They go right away. I do prefer 91% rubbing alcohol over any alternative version. It's very easy to find. Most drugstores have it, and of course you can order it online as well. With all of these being filled, I'm gonna put the rest of the white in this cylindrical mold. I'm gonna hold the mold straight up. I have made sure that all the edges have been clamped down, and then I'm simply going to pour the soap straight into the top. You could see that little slimy top that just slid in there. That's no big deal because it's all white and it's going into the circle mold. And then to make sure that it stays standing up, I will either lean it against something, or if I have multiple to do, I will stick it in a big bucket with rice around it so that you just kind of shove it in its place and it stays standing up with all of its little buddies. So we've done some soap colored with liquid colorant, and we've done some soap uncolored. So now let's do some colored with mica. I'm going to use Orange Vibrance in Clear Melt and Pour to make the perfect peach color, and then I'm going to start to stir it. Now, this does take longer to incorporate than a liquid colorant, obviously, but it's still relatively easy. Some mica colorants are a little more difficult. That's just something that you guys can test for yourself. See what you're most comfortable with. But again, I wouldn't use an oxide unless it was already dispersed in glycerin. I wouldn't use any sort of lake colorants, no FD and C colorants, none of those. Also, no neons unless those have been dispersed already in glycerin. Also, if you see that the colorants are starting to make little bubbles like this right here, once again, just spritz with the rubbing alcohol. It's gonna help you break that surface tension and incorporate the mica better. Alrighty, once that's all mixed in, we'll just start pouring into each of the cavities. By the way, this company, again, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, but we'll certainly leave a link to down below, gave us a free mold whenever we purchased. It was a little cupcake mold, so that was pretty cool. Now, all of these soaps have been sitting for an hour at the minimum, so it's time to unmold them, which is one of the things that, again, I really, really like about silicone molds, is that it's easy to get the embeds out, which ends up saving you time, which, if you are selling your soap, ends up saving you money. The quicker that you figure out that time is money, the better off you are and the more profitable your business becomes. And if that means spending a little extra money to buy multiple molds like I did here, I bought 2 of them so that I can pour more at a time so that embed making is over faster, then that's what you gotta do. Invest in yourself. Also, these raspberries look really delicious. They look super real. This mold is a little stiffer than the ones from Vanillay, but I honestly think that that means it's gonna hold up for longer. I've never had a problem with any of the silicone molds I've bought. I've often had them for years and years and still continue to use them. Let's see how we feel about these peaches. Oh yeah, that looks really good. That looks really good, like super accurate. And before you buy your molds, here's another quick tip. Make sure that you read the dimensions of them. I personally have purchased molds that were either too big or too small many times because I didn't just take the time to either convert from centimeters to inches or just read the specifications in general, and it didn't serve me well, and then I wasted more time having to send things back, processing returns, whatever. Just spend the extra minute grabbing a ruler and seeing how big they are. For my bars, I don't get anything bigger than 1 inch because that's the thickness of the bar. Let's pop some of these little strawberries out. So cute. There's the strawberries up close. My little sister Marilee used to call them straw babies. Go ahead and get the rest of them out of here. If you would like to add a little extra shimmer to your soap embeds, you can always spritz it with a mica duster. I will leave some of my favorites down below. Or you can take a paintbrush and dip it in mica and do it that way. Or you can add a little bit of mica to a sandwich bag and shake it all around. Oh yeah, let's do the sugar cubes. We can just pull those out real quick. They definitely have a little bit of texture on them. They look really real. And if you find that your favorite mold supplier has gone out of business or is currently not shipping, then take the dimensions of your embed, like these little squares here, and look around online and see if you can find an alternative. That's what Simeon did, and look what he ended up finding. It's almost exactly the same size, but there's a lot more cavities in it, and it was cheaper. It was on Amazon. Now I know some people are gonna ask me, but Katie, what about cold processed soap as embeds? Yes, you can use these molds for cold processed soap, but I never ever recommend people make cold processed soap embeds, once again, because of time, especially if you are selling. It is not worth your time, I promise. Just use the glycerin soap base, because that is gonna get you a lot faster results. They're gonna come out cleaner most of the time, and it's gonna be a lot easier for you to make a lot of them. Got my last ones here. These are half, as you can see, half of a yellow. And just to save you guys some measuring time on these signature soap gumballs, per 9 cavities, you will use 2 ounces of soap. So I have 6 pairs of 9 with these, so I ended up using 6 ounces because I only filled them halfway up. If I was filling them all the way up, of course, I would use 12. For storing your silicone or your chocolate molds, I recommend keeping them in buckets, not exposed to the open air, because silicone tends to grab onto every single dust particle that ever lived in your room. And if you've gotten them really dirty with mica and stuff, simply rinse them off using hot water and then let them dry completely before storing them. And as far as cleaning out your melting pitchers go, what I would recommend doing is putting as hot a water as you can get into here and letting it sit for about 30 minutes to an hour to soften the soap around the edges, and then wiping it out. It's very easy to clean. If you have more soap in here, you don't want to put it down the drain, go ahead and put it in the trash. And I do know that depending on what type of melt and pour you use, you might be able to peel it off the sides and simply reuse your containers again. I'm not able to do that with the type of soap I have though, so I just prefer to use the hot water method. For the silicone tube mold, you're simply gonna take one end, peel it off, and then pop out the little tube. And you'll always have this, you know, this little bitty bit of soap. Most of the time you can just peel it off. But if it's too hard to do, just take a very dull knife and scrape, scrape, scrape it, and it'll look up looking very, very smooth and perfect. And there you have it. Everything you need to know about making soap embeds. I hope you all enjoyed this video and found it very useful. If you use any of the techniques that I used today, be sure to take a picture of it, post it on Instagram, and use the Royalty Soaps hashtag so I can see what you guys are up to. If you would like to see more videos like this one, you can give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely royal day, and bye for now. Meow.